Good afternoon, fellow citizens. Welcome to the Citizens Chat Show. Thank you for being with us here every Friday as we try to discuss issues around the country on civil and political issues. Kindly be with us today. We're going to discuss, of course, the current state of our economy today, and of course, trying to map out the challenges and of course, the successes that we've had over this period and post-COVID. Of course, on my panel is a team of experts, economists, that will have to dissect these issues and help us understand how far we are in this current state. Joined on the panel, and to start from my far right is Dr. Enoq Twinoburyo. He's an economist, and of course, he works with the SDG in Center in Rwanda. Enoq, you're welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here and happy to engage and discuss matters that affect all of us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Enoq, and thank you for honoring our invitation. Followed by Jane Nalunga. This is your second appearance here?
Yes, it is, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jane.
And good afternoon, our viewers.
Yeah. Jane is executive director with Seatini, and of course, an economist. Jane, we hope to hear much and expertise from you.
Thank you.
Then followed by almost our regular. You're becoming a regular, and we have to ensure that it happens. Let's have these discussions going. Major retired Awich Pollar is, of course, the Director External Services with the NRM. Major, you're welcome.
Thank you so much. Greetings to viewers. I am lucky to be with the economist. I'm a lawyer, but if I don't find much to add, I will say I have nothing more useful to add.
Like a lawyer.
I will just share my little views.
Yeah, thank you very much.
They say lawyers are economists without statistics.
Yeah. And finally is the regular panelist, Joseph Ochieno, is the UPC ideologue, but also the UPC leadership contender. Joseph, you're welcome.
It's good to be here, and of course, I'm very lucky that in my role, I'm all round. My job is basically to make sure that it works, and yeah, we hope we'll get the latest on the miracles that NR has brought in.
Thank you, post-COVID. Yeah, thank you. Maybe to start from my far right, like we went with the people who are so much into the field. I need to start with you, Enoq. Kindly try to tell our viewers out there what is the general outlook of the current economic situation in Uganda.
So maybe to start with is that Uganda is within the global sphere. And as you know, COVID has had adverse effects on the economy. And this has led to Uganda's economic output to collapse. In the last year, we had, a recession. And what we've seen is that, the slowdown that we have encountered is not just a V-shaped recovery. It is one where you go into the trough. It's more of a J recovery. And some of the things that we see, we just recently in June had a lockdown of 42 days. And usually when you have extreme lockdown, production capacity is at less than 50% of economic output. So 42 days, or we could roughly use 2 months. Half of those 2 months is just 1 month of economic output lost. Now, when you lose such of this magnitude, it's likely to also affect the economic output for 2021. Now, what this means, of course, Uganda is still a low-income economy, and its economic output we had negative growth in 2020. We're likely to have maybe marginally above 1%. But still, it's less than the population growth. Now, this has happened at the backdrop of, fairly, some of the other economic fundamentals remained in check. Inflation was in single digits, meaning prices were not, rapidly growing. The exchange rate, contrary to, what we would expect, remained. It actually appreciated, the Ugandan shilling appreciated. And some of these are temporary adjustments. So when the economy recovers, we're likely to see these buffers dwindle. And then they simply speak to outlook risks. Because like the exchange rate, you'd expect, because of the high import value that will come with the infrastructure, the oil imports, all these now with the increasing global oil prices, and we have 20% of our imports are petroleum products, all these are likely to have an adverse effect. But more pertinently, what we saw is that even money in people's pockets also dwindled. Ministry of Finance statistics give us about 600 to, the numbers have oscillated between 650 to about 750 active payee. Now, you remember we have a labor force of 10 million people. So people who actually have in the formal sector are just about 650 to 750. And that speaks to the high levels of dependency. I've already spoken to the fact that we have a small middle income class. And people have, argued that your statistics could be wrong. But if you count your UAA up to UAZ, those are about 600,000 cars. So if you add our UB, which is now at I think UBG or something, you'll find that we are at about 800,000 cars. But this will include buses, it will include tractors, trucks. So the actual numbers of people who own these are actually very few. But even when, before pre-COVID, we had a payee register of about 1.1 million people. But of those, only 50% were in the 30% tax bracket, earning more than a gross pay of 410,000. So again, it speaks to the numbers. But even when you come to, because we had the household survey, which was done in COVID times, and they are telling you that the median wage pay is about 250,000. That's what across the board of all wage earners. So again, it speaks to the small numbers that we have. Median wage pay means that half of those are earning less than 250. So again, it's not a very, and what we saw also within COVID, we saw that during COVID, poverty increased to 21.9. Pre-COVID, it was about 18.7. So meaning 3% fell into, and that's just 3% of our population is about 1.2. So that's how we just a shock away from. So the economy, yes, could have been performing well.
Yes.
But it came at the backdrop of where we're having the National Development Plan 2, which had, ended with the target of to attain middle income, which had not been attained at the time.
Yes.
So underneath this is that while the economy is growing, you also have a growing population. And now what we need to pay attention to is the quality of the population. Our median age in Uganda is about 15 years. Now, the economic characteristics of a 15-year-old are unpromising, because this one is not in the economic. If you compare with economies that are very productive, their median age is in a working, active age. So again, I think these are some of the issues that we ought to think and solve. And one other thing that I think when I spoke about some of the buffers that we had, usually when we have like inflation, it has always come from the supply side, because inflation comes when demand outstrips supply.
Yes.
So when you have, our demand is not necessarily growing very rapidly. But what happens is that our supply tends to dwindle, so the gap widens. When that gap widens, then prices tend to go up. So what that means is that we have a challenge of inflation coming from the supply side. And then what the central bank is going to do, it is going to use demand management to ensure that it constrains this demand, so that this gap narrows. Now, when that gap is narrowing, what it means is that yes, prices will come down, but there's a sacrifice on the economy because you're trying to constrain that demand. So we've already seen what we call like a sacrifice ratio. Growth tends to dwindle because you're trying to manage inflation. But what we should be doing is that these supply challenges that we tend to face have been time and again reoccurring. So we should be addressing the structural bottlenecks towards this supply constraint. And those are some of the issues that I think we have short-term issues, but also structural issues to the economy.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Enoq, for that very, very enriching opener. And of course, that is going to give us direction and insights into the conversation. I want to bring in Jane. Jane, you're a player, a sector player into this economy. And of course, Seatini is doing so much in ensuring that the findings that you put across on how we are performing as a country. So I would want to invite you in, and so that you can share with us the general outlook from your perspective as a person who is really involved.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Damien, and thank you so much also for this invitation to be part of this eminent team. From my point of view, and I agree with Enoq, that the economy is not doing very well, but where I differ maybe is that even before COVID, our economy was not doing very well. But it depends on what indicators we are using. If we use indicators of economic growth, GDP, it can be okay. But I think as a country, we need to look at other indicators of development. And I think we need to separate economic growth and development. Because what we see even before COVID, because COVID just made the situation worse. What we see, our economy, even before COVID, that we have an economy which is growing. They are telling us it's growing, but it's jobless growth. The young people, they are no jobs. We are exporting our children to go and work outside, and we are depending on those remittances to come in. So we are looking at also economic growth which is disseminating the environment, when you see the cutting down of trees and all that. So we need to look at the quality of our economic growth. And I think we also need to look at the issue of inequality. Poverty is there, it's an issue, but I think we need to go beyond poverty to look at inequality in this country. The poor are really poor and they are becoming poorer. And the few rich are becoming really rich. So when you look at our economy, this is where COVID found us. COVID found us when we are still exporting raw materials with a very high trade deficit, because we are exporting raw materials, importing finished products. Our value-added products are very few. And that means, and this is where I agree with the president, we are exporting jobs, because we are exporting raw materials and we import them back when they are value-added. So for me, when I look at the economy, I think we need to do much, much more. Post-COVID, as they say, every cloud has a silver lining. COVID has really battered us. It has battered our economy. But it gives us a chance to rethink our economy, to be able to rethink the policies we want to follow, to be able to critically look at the challenges facing us as a nation, as a people, and be able to address them. Recently, just I think yesterday, I was listening to one of the ministers. He was talking about the fuel prices. And he was saying, hey, for us, we liberalized. We liberalized a long time ago, And I was saying, what are you talking about? Because policies are supposed to support the people, support the economy, work for the people. So you can't talk about a policy which is hurting the people and you say, for us we liberalized. But you are the government, And as we move forward, like I have said, we need to rethink very, very seriously. And for me, I think this is the right time to be able to say no to some policies which have been pushed upon us by, for example, the IMF, World Bank. It's IMF and World Bank which told us liberalize, privatize, deregulate, but they haven't worked. And today we have a chance to be able to say, let us rethink privatization. Can privatization work? And when you look at the challenges we are finding today, issues of the fuel prices, looking at the issue, remember, after COVID, the prices of government hospitals, the issue of the bus park, the increase in prices, that's unbridled privatization. But you see government trying to come in to say we are taking the bus drivers, they are criminals, you know, then they are saying we are going to control the prices of hospital charges, you know, but I think this is the right time to be able to say what model of development are we going to look at. And for me, I think if we don't do that, we'll be losers when it comes to this COVID pandemic.
Yeah, interesting, Jane, and thank you very much. We need to build further on that. I need to then bring in Awich, because of course you're part of government. Of course, you're not the spokesperson, but since you're in there, you'll try to help us understand the current situation. You see yourself as having registered some level of stability from of course, post-COVID.
Let me start from the fact that, as I said earlier, I made a disclaimer that I may not be talking in economic sense like doctors say. The last economics I had was in Imperial School at 6 before I went to Makerere. So I may not talk economics per se, but I think I can share my views on the social indicators, because these social indicators really don't need to say it in economic terms. Uganda has been running development plan, this and this, where you find you have exhausted this, then you move to another and all that. But also, so everything that we do fits into that development plan. Even for us, recently we came out of election. We designed a manifesto as a party, and a manifesto which we marketed to the people, and people voted on that basis, and it formed a social contract with the people. Now, this manifesto had a very strong economic aspect, which is supposed to be implemented. But of course, we know that unforeseen factors, the COVID that we're saying, came in and it disrupted. And this disruption can be seen from even revenues, how much is URA collecting, and the simple indicators that we really see that things are not well. But I think the way, because we have had the advantage of having been in government for long, the way the economy is organized is such a way that at least people have food. People don't, we are not, except a few places which really need to be reinforced with food distribution. But the nature of the economy is such that people can still eat. And also the other thing is that the necessities are still available. I keep telling my congressperson here that time was there when even a mere beer or soda had to be allocated. There was a allocation committee to allocate beer to Bushenyi, to Kidgum, to where?
That is that's after 9 years of Idi Amin, for which we fought together.
So
credit to Museveni, he was a
these
party
challenges, we still have available goods. And of course, available services. If you're talking in terms of services like medical, services like education, services like health, I talked already in health, medical, services like legal. Of course, the challenge there is to move closer and see if you have these goods and services, how much of the population can afford? How many? Like now, people are going to school. How many parents can afford to pay school fees for the children to go back? But the undisputed fact is that the services are there. Now, it calls upon a collective responsibility, government and other actors, that if there's a challenge, and which there is a challenge on the affordability of those services and goods, what do we do amidst the unforeseen factor like COVID? So that's where we have to put our brain on. But apart from that, I have seen, maybe the economists will tell me whether there's an aspect which is being addressed, which I don't see. I have not seen it as an ordinary person, is that I see a scenario in the bigger part of the country, like North and Northeast, including West Nile, from West Nile and the whole of Teso, and maybe even Bugisu. And that one, you're already talking of half of the country. I don't know what the economists are saying, that here is a one Ochieno who had a piece of land 40 years ago. The same Ochieno produced children. The grandchildren were produced, and the grandchildren are there, and they are still on the same piece of land. This may not be unique. The uniqueness is that these people have not developed their human resource. They have not gone to school. I know this could be, say, in Kabale or Ikigezi, but you find a family of 9. One is a teacher, one is a doctor, one is an engineer. But these areas, I'm saying there is nothing. Are we not going to end up on people dying on the street? So I want to see what challenge the economists are. This may not even be government as such, but what are the brain thinkers in the economic aspect? Because if the economists are thinking, the government is open. If you came up with an idea, or if you came up with government, it is a community. Government listens to people. Are there economists who are addressing their mind to that? I wouldn't like a situation.
I would believe that in that case, of course, you have experts. The government always has its experts that would advise, especially where you have presidential advisors. After 5 years, do you think that is something that...
Which is saying that they've outsourced the role of government?
My call is generally to the experts out there, because government is formed through, first of all, one avenue is through a representative of the people, which is the National Assembly. Because all the 40+ million cannot be in one assembly like Kololo Airstrip or Freedom Square in Makere or City Square, Constitution Square. The only assembly we have is Parliament. So I'm just tickling the minds and the brains of all of us that, has anybody ever thought about this kind of development?
That's fair enough.
Do they really know? Because if you have, now I counted one family, and I found that from the same piece of land that was the original had, now they have 102 people on the same piece of land, and none of them is educated. I actually find ourselves shameful, because in the area, our families are undisputedly educated. But I said, but won't they come and get our cows by force in future, and get our goats by force? Because these people will have no food. For me, on my own, in my family, I've told my brothers and sisters that this land is only for burial. Please have yours in your head. Study, have it in your head. Land, we shall come for burial. So we left 1 or so brothers there. But the rest are similar like that. Meaning that even if we have it as a family at home, in future our goats and cows, because these people will not die of hunger. They'll come and kill this goat. So I don't know what the experts, maybe there's a position paper written on that, that I'm not aware. I don't know. But for now, as government, the social contract or economic aspects that we had with the people, which started in 2021 going forward, including the annual budget that we proposed, because after all, the 5-year election, we shall have to execute it one by one. So this 1 year has met challenges. However, despite the challenges, it has already been mentioned, inflation has not gone up, the dollar rate has not. Actually, it has gone in favor of the Uganda shillings. Services are available, goods are available. So, amidst challenges, government has tried.
Thank you very much, Pollar. And I know, Joseph, you have a lot to say in that line.
Yeah.
And of course, importantly, is I think what he has brought out that would possibly take our mind as panelists here is how to appreciate that aspect of development for regions like that. And of course, I saw the president talking about the 4-acre model, and I thought that would feed into some areas like that. Maybe the economists will have to help at some point. Joseph, what do you think?
You know, just like Awich, I did my last economics in A-level, but I was lucky that...
Which school was that?
I did my economics in Pollar High School, but it was high-level economics. But that's for high school. But I can tell you that I did some other economics while I was in exile when these guys didn't want thinkers in Uganda. Once upon a time it happened that once they came to power. So I had to force myself back into this Ugandan space. They chased me away from Makerere University simply because I was able to challenge them. By the way, interestingly, on the question of prioritizing resources, I challenged a senior NRM person who came to Mitchell Hall. This person said past regimes misallocated resources. So as a student, very contextual, I dared ask, how can you say past regimes misallocated resources when you're a medical doctor, putting on military combat, talking to us politics here at campus, instead of being across the valley, meaning Nalunga, you know? Of course, students went wild. That was my top scene other than being the fact that I was Miel and Ochieno. But I think this is very relevant to what we're discussing here. It is relevant because Awich has made a very important point. Actually, that really should be the headline. That coming from West Nile, really not up to Bugisu, up to my own Tororo, in fact, should not end in Tororo, should go to Busoga, up to River Nile. There is a crisis of resource absence. The 4-acre model would not apply in my own home. My own home, we inherited my father's land between 3 brethren. Right now, my nephews, my late brother, did well, has 5 boys, and I keep on reminding them, just exactly as you said, this is impressive, that the land has got to be divided into 3, and then in their case, subdivided by 5.
Yeah.
By 5. And it's a crisis, and that is after I've even been good enough to say their sisters, meaning because that's part of the other game, in the fact that we really don't have to give land to women, to girls, which is extraordinarily wrong, that all my nieces are welcome within my other side of the plot, plus my sister, and whatever else I'm able to gain. But that is part of the economic challenge. But I must say that I'm suitably impressed by Enoq's and Jane's submissions. And Enoq's is very precise manner, going bits by bits. It's extraordinary that for the first time, I'm actually putting in context the appreciation of the figures of the so-called economics miracle. When you look at the numbers, that's actually rather impressive. That they're just 0.6% or thereabout of 1 million people is what we're talking about. And these are the pot of the Ugandan so-called elite. And within that, we actually know that normally the 1% would be the guys who own these big estates. And some of those ownerships cannot be traced, including by Uganda Revenue Authority. And then you go ahead and look at where are the rest of other Ugandans. And I think we're absolutely also right that when I go around my own experiences going around the country, including in Western Uganda, where there's relative perception of relative wealth, and by and large it is true, I still just wonder that looking back as a high school student when I first visited Western Uganda and in context about the miracles, where would we be particularly targeting the inequality element, meaning the poor? It is a national crisis. But then there's something else when you talk about the price differentials. I was shocked again by the figures presented by Enoq, that if we look at the fact that the average wages, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of shillings. And I'm saying that in the last 2 days, I had to socially spend, imperative socially spending, not in a bad way, but as part of work, about the same amount of money to basically engage a group of a few friends at Kampala. And then I wonder, am I, even me, Ochieno, the progressive left socialist, living in another world? Where are the rest of Uganda? So it's a crisis. But that said, I don't know, Awich. You talked about liberalization, and that's part of the nature of this. We liberalized to the extent that the dollar is doing rather poorly against the shilling, which would be good news for Ugandans, you know? And if the dollar is doing rather poorly, then really the NRM ministers telling Ugandans that fuel prices has gone high in part because of the dollars, because that's what I argued, part because of the dollars.
But I heard IMF contesting that. Did I read it somewhere? That there is need to revisit that on the shilling working,
doing better than
the dollar. Yes.
Neither here nor there. But if they don't contest it, if they don't contest it, part of the other report which has come out recently is about this thing about mistrust, a national crisis. So read my column in the next piece. But the point really here is this: that then, if that is the case, why would it be that central government, does not intervene, and say that in order to save the majority poor, say that we shall review as part of taxation, because interventionist policies, and particularly you guys who claim to be leftist, only when it's convenient to you, that look at 10 shillings, at 10% taxation to the oil companies, let's do 8% and leave the buffer either to the taxi drivers, buffer to the ordinary passengers who go to drive themselves out of Kampala, and buffer to the people who go to travel between Kampala and Lira to go home and have their livelihood, and buffer to the implications of the food prices, which are directly impacted on the majority poor, including across the country. That really was the economics, the basics that I had then, including the one which is common sense economics, really works as a matter of ideology. The real problem today is that the state of economy, notwithstanding actually another very impressive thing, the fact that inflation rate is really not very high in comparative terms, and so therefore the Ugandan economy should not be having the shock that it does not have. That is, if the state was intervening, as Jane was saying, appropriately in certain aspects, using taxation policies where it's applicable, basically fiscal policies as it were, as applicable. They're not doing it because they're not interested. Here, to the extent that, again, education, health services, which we're not talking about in terms of the impact, including around COVID, has been left to the market. At what stage then does central government come to use their weapon as an equipment to buffer and perhaps to deliver? Final point, it is actually shocking, Awich, if you're suggesting that we are begging opinion from economists to advise NRA government. When we pay government, we pay them hugely to think on our behalf, to act on our behalf. The governments are more than parents, because our parents, we don't pay them to do. Governments, we pay them, and we pay them expensively, including presidential advisors, as you're saying. These presidential advisors, whom I understand only see Mr. Museveni on television, and many times when they meet them, these luncheons where they spend huge amount of money compared to what people would others spend in rural Tongomo, he's the one who ends up advising them.
Okay. You do want
I don't think you really got me right. Because, put it this way, many times you yourself and others have come out to say, government doesn't listen to us, they don't listen to the ordinary person. I'm just trying to tell you that the government listens to everybody. And I'm tickling our minds because this is an informal discussion.
You made a very important point.
This is an informal discussion. I'm throwing it there. I'm not saying government is abdicating from its role. I'm saying as we come to brainstorm, as we come to share, I'm putting it out to thinkers. So I'm not saying government is abstaining from its role. If you want us to think and leave you out, it's okay, we can do it. Is that what you want?
Let me bring in Enoq.
I thought I'm trying to give you the human face. I'm giving you the human face, the flexibility of government. But should you want it the other way, but don't cry tomorrow that we don't listen to you, don't make you talk.
Is there any evidence you've ever listened in the last
25
years?
Let me bring in Enoq. Enoq, you talked about the 3% increase of course, in poverty, just at the shake of almost 40 days of the lockdown. I just want to invite you to just tell us what could be the main challenges of our economic development as a country.
So some of the things that I alluded to, one, I think listening to everyone here, we've alluded to the issue of productivity. And the issue of productivity that is coming out is even land productivity.
Yeah.
So, and the UK, when you kept mentioning, the UK and Uganda are same size. In terms of same size in terms of land. But in terms of economic output, those are multitudes of what we have. So again, it speaks to the levels of land productivity that we have here in Uganda. I think one of the reports that I saw on land, which was done by the World Bank, was that only 20% of Uganda's land was registered. The other was communally owned and also bound with conflict. And at that point, they were alluding to the fact that, you know, it was reducing even agricultural output by about 6% because of the conflicts on land. But what we've also seen with, you know, agricultural output, it is not because of productivity, it's because people are increasing acreage. Now, she alluded to the fact that we do have high levels of inequality. And when you're speaking about, you know, Western Uganda, you'll see lots of land inequality. Big chunks owned by very few people. And when you dig underneath there are high levels and increasing levels of poverty within even the region in Western Africa. I mean, Western Uganda. So this, I think the issue we need, and I think for me, when we go back to even the first class of economics that we all did, was talking about factors of production.
That's correct.
Now, those factors of production are the ones that will give you productivity. So you have to look at land and how do you organize it. At some point, I read that, you know, 45% of our land is owned for prestige. You know, 45% just for prestige.
Wow.
So there's no productivity on these chunks of land. We had ranches which were taken over by individuals who have never done anything on that land. So the issue of land...
These guys, these were guys, the ranches, yes.
The issues of land productivity are very key.
No, we haven't.
Labor is another thing. I read a report by this institute. It's actually, as you're going up, the East African, what is it? But their report was saying, it's the university, I think, what is it? The East African universities. It's somewhere there. So one of their reports was saying that 50%.
East Africa, something like that.
Yeah. When you're going to Chambogo.
Yes, when you're going to Chambogo. The report they had done, they are showing that 50% of the students who are released, you know, from tertiary and university are not needed by the industry. So again, it speaks to the skills gap, that, you know, whatever you're producing out there is not needed. So again, it speaks to the labor productivity that we're dealing with. But also, you've seen many economies, when they are planning, they are also doing labor planning as part of national planning to say this is our trajectory where we want to go. So let's also have our labor planning to ensure that the skills that come out here are actually matching what the industry needs. Issues to deal with entrepreneurship. We keep saying we are highly entrepreneurial, but the kind of entrepreneurial skills that we are nurturing are not of a sustainable manner. They are also not organized, you know, like even the small, medium enterprises. You know, they're a bit of favorable tax regimes, but tax education is not. So you need to organize and ensure that these incubations are actually nurturing people in a more sustainable entrepreneurial. Of course, the other factor of production is capital. We have one of the highest interest rates in the region. And for a fact, when you have your interest rates higher than your level of economic growth, because your level of economic growth is a measure of income to pay off the interest rates that you're paying. So if it's higher, sustainably, these interest rates become a red tape on what you're supposed to do. So the cost
then go ahead and compound it with both population growth versus inflation, and then indeed high unemployment growth.
So the issue now of, for example, high cost of capital, but leave alone even high cost of capital. Today we've reached a point that even there are high levels of, the banks have lent and reached a point where there's no appetite, increased appetite to lend to the private sector. So what they're doing is now they're actually lending to government. Because today, I think the last figures that I saw, the banks and other, you know, the borrowing from the private sector by government had reached 26 trillion. And the lending to the private sector by banks was about 18 trillion.
What is the disincentive there?
So the disincentive is, because I think one of the reports I was reading from the central bank is that 50% of loan applications from
defaulted.
Not even defaulted, are being declined. So what these guys don't want to do is to adversely select. But also the relative gap between what government is borrowing at and what you're lending at
Yeah.
is narrow. So they would rather not take the risk for that smaller margin. So they would rather lend to government because it's risk-free. So those are some of the issues
So then
that we
what
see.
is central bank doing? What are economic planners doing?
Okay.
And also maybe to also be, and this is happening when we have very low levels of credit penetration. Our credit to private sector credit to our economic output is about just 13%. This is half the sub-Saharan Africa average. And globally, all over, credit leverages economic output. The most indebted countries today in the world, US, China and Japan, are the most indebted, both private sector and government. So meaning that credit actually does leverage.
And the economies are sustainable.
Yes.
Of course.
So, yeah, but
Yes, I need to bring in Jen before we break off.
This is very interesting. I will start with the question Mr. Ochieno has raised. What's the central bank doing?
Yes.
And it goes back to our mode of development. We liberalized. Recently, some time back, the central bank issued the CBR. The banks ignored them because all of them are basically private sector. We don't have even a national bank. And you can't run an economy when you're not controlling the finances.
Yes.
Today, government, during COVID, the government borrowed money from IMF, from World Bank, put it in UDB to on lend. Yet, government would be mobilizing resources and encouraging people to save and on lending. And as you know, they tell us women we don't borrow, but we save, and that's why I was saying we need to rethink the way we are running our economy, and we need to rethink the financial sector. We have, liberalization has really affected the financial sector so much. We have liberalized the banking sector, the telecommunication, the insurance, and these are the sectors which mop resources.
Liberalization without regulation.
Yes. They mop, they send out, and then we borrow to on lend. These are things which we need to address. I wanted to say something about the land crisis. My brothers, the land crisis is not just it's a national issue.
Crisis, indeed,
and as Enoq has said, there is a lot of land grabbing, and this is the inequality we are talking about.
Yes.
You find somebody, there is land there empty, and the people don't have land. And there is an issue which he raised about UK. You remember the Industrial Revolution, but maybe this is a disclaimer on my part. I'm not an economist. I'm a historian, but I live.
Indeed.
I live what we are talking about, and I want to refer you to a book by a very good economist, Eric Reinhardt, Why Poor Countries Are Poor and Why Rich Countries Are Rich. Very, very good book, showing us, and it goes back to also the book we are discussing, the Hajun Chang, kicking away the ladder. The developed countries did other things to develop. They are telling us others, and we are swallowing. And somebody sits and says, comfortably we are liberalized. So when you look at the issue of the land crisis, our population is going up. But it goes back to what Enoq was saying about planning. When you look at the Industrial Revolution, they planned. Land, don't subdivide it. All of you go, education, go to the Marines, go to be a doctor, be a lawyer, get off the land. But for us, we haven't planned it that way because there's no education, and the economy is contracting. Our people are on the land because either they stone the land or they do border or they go out as laborers. They are no incentive.
Yes.
Exactly. Another issue which I wanted to touch on is the issue of productivity. And it goes to how we have to organize our economy. When we talk about productivity, and I see this also in the Polish model,
Yes.
when we talk about productivity, for what? Because the moment you continue, you increase productivity without providing a market, you are keeping these farmers, the producers, in abject poverty. I give you always an example of pineapples. You see, when you are driving, you have seen it, you know?
Yeah.
You are driving.
I sympathize with those guys,
and,
by the way. Yes.
This guy,
Yeah.
you don't sympathize with this guy who has the pineapples. You sympathize with that
Make
farmer.
more.
True. You see this guy with 10 pineapples, and he's running, and you just say, 10,000, okay, dump them behind there. Then you wonder, if you are buying 10 pineapples in Kampala, there on the street, at 10,000, how much is a farmer getting? How much? You know? So when we talk about productivity, we have to link it to viable markets,
and value
to
addition.
industrialization. And that's what we call backward and forward linkages, you know, so that we connect production, we connect it to value addition, we connect it to trade. And across that value chain, we need to do so many things. We need to think. It's not going to be automatic. I saw recently the president's speech on industrialization. I don't know who wrote it for him. That you see, we have all these markets. We have the CFTA, we have
those are his pet
EBA,
words.
we have the EBA, we have COMESA, we have. But have you organized your production to be able to link
Penetrate
up to
that
those
market,
markets? It isn't automatic. And we keep telling people that the markets, when you sign an agreement, because like now we are negotiating the Continental Free Trade Area, that's market access. It is not market entry. Market entry is about the standards, the standards in terms of quantity, in terms of quality.
Yes.
And we are failing that even when it comes to maize here, our neighboring country in Kenya. So what I'm saying, we need to rethink. And when we are rethinking, we have to look at how do we increase incomes at individual level, at household level, and at national level, sustainably. Because most people, when you look at all these documents, they tell us, all incomes at household level. What about at national level? Because the national level is as indebted as the household level. You know, the debts, we are drowning in debts, and this is what we are discussing here about the Chinese debts. So for me, what I'm saying really, as we move forward, we need to have a deeper discussion around our economy, really deep. You know, sometimes when we talk about a national dialogue, you know, people think about politics.
That's correct.
UPC, DP, is it iPod? You know?
Yeah.
But we need a national dialogue on the economy.
Thank you very much, Jane. And of course, that sends us into the break. And of course, when we get back, we're going to discuss, of course, deeper and also the understanding of our economy, opportunities, achievements, and of course, more challenges that are out there, so that we can at least be informed and also inform you out there. Let's have this short break. But of course, this conversation is streaming live on our YouTube channel, Civic Space TV, but also on our Twitter hashtag #ChatShowUG, and on Facebook we are also live there. Be part of this conversation, and to tell you, of course, we are powered by Inspire Africa Coffee. Let's have this short break and return. Welcome back from that short break, and thank you very much for being part of this conversation. We are speaking economics today, and of course our economy as a country at large. Also, kindly follow our conversation. We are on Chat Show UG on our Twitter hashtag, but also on YouTube streaming live on Civic Space TV. Facebook, we are there. All those that are following on Facebook, kindly be part of this conversation. And yes, my panelists, you're welcome again. And of course, thank you for being part of this conversation. Enoch, Jen, Pollar, and Joseph. Jen, you of course concluded well. I need to bring in Awich. We just trying to recover from COVID-19, and of course there are plans that the government has put across for more of a recovery. Are we achieving them at this point?
Recovery plans, these are things put out, and if you ask about the achievements, it would be opinionated. I will have this opinion, of course the congressman will have this opinion, but all of us are there to see. But permit me to just put in a word about this land question before we leave it. I like to say that the land question is a long thing and should be dealt with. I think the only addition that I brought was that in the region that I've done preliminary research is that the same people are on the land and none of them is educated. That was the addition. So they have not developed any skill at all. But we all know, even before the 1995 Constitution, contrary to what the congressman is saying that NRM took land, is that NRM was with the view that the ranches, it said took ranches should actually be given to the people. To the effect that
but not to individuals.
A ranch restructuring committee was formed. I remember very well because I am part of those who started this government.
Of course you were.
A ranch restructuring committee was formed, chaired by none other than David Pulkol. And I remember one of the members was a Major Ondoga Ria Maza. Ondoga was a very brilliant guy. He wrote a book called Museveni's Long March. He died, unfortunately, rest in peace. Another member was Latigo Lal, not the Latigo of the leader of opposition, another Latigo. So this committee were tasked to restructure the land and not the ranches, and not to give to individuals, as you say. Ordinary people went. I remember for a fact that Professor Kamuntu, the recent past Minister of Justice, lost about 6 square miles to the ordinary people. Even Byanyima, to a big extent, part of why they are not happy was because the ranch restructuring committee cut a big chunk of their land. And it went in Ankole, in Nakasongola, and everywhere. So your assertion that ranches were taken is not true. Ranches were restructured and ordinary people put in. You can go and ask Pollar.
How did Kisozi lose its status as a government ranch?
I will answer later, but let me have my floor. Yes. So it is true on record that a ranch restructuring committee was set, I repeat, chaired by David Pulkol, and they really restructured ranches, giving ranches almost what you could call land belongs to the tillers. But moving forward, the Constitution had a lot of debate about the land. And in my opinion, the Constitution didn't go in detail. They just said, well, land belongs to the citizens. I remember I urge members to differentiate between land belongs to the citizens and power belongs to the people. People read as if it is one and the same, meaning that land belongs to the citizens cannot be given to foreigners. But power belongs to people, meaning that in any LC1, even an Arab would participate. So power belongs to the people, land belongs to the citizens.
But that's very interesting.
Those are clear. Now, when it came to the Land Act, a lot of things were also gone over. To date, we are still fumbling with the amendment and all this and all that. So it shows you that the land question is not dealt with. And if we don't, it affects the productivity. If we don't, it affects. So you can trace the history from restructuring of the ranches to through the Constitution, the Land Act, and even the implementation of the Land Tribunal. Up to date, it's still hanging. Now, about what government has come with, the many, of course, Jen mentioned some, like the borrowing of the money to redo the effects. some businesses are saying, look, I was drastically affected. I need this. So many interventions were put in place. The economists know each and every one of them. But to how far the interventions is effective, maybe it's not clearly seen now, in my opinion. I can't make an assessment yet. I would want the execution of this budget, this annual budget here, because that is only when I can see, I can judge it in perspective of the achievement, the expectations from what, because every budget has its expectations, what it expects to achieve. For now, maybe the detailed economist can see already whether it is it has yielded. Of course, there are allegations saying that the money that was borrowed to mitigate these effects were not used appropriately. I don't know how true it is, but so many interventions were put in place, as you properly you said. But my view is that, not being a detailed economist, I can't make a quick assessment. I would throw it back to my other colleagues to see. I would only say I would see at the execution of this budget, this annual budget, which ends in June.
Yes.
So we are left with, that is for me when I can conclusively say this budget was expected to get this, it did not. It was expected to get this, it has not.
Yes.
But for my colleagues who have detailed explanation, maybe before the budget ends, they have answers.
Okay, interesting. Maybe I will need to bring in Joseph. You're trying to suggest that the current trend shows that more of the economy is in the hands of the few. There's a few people who are holding the economy now.
Yeah.
But I would want to ask, how would the economy be affected, especially if the democracy is an oligarchy?
Is it?
Of course it is. No, but I think which, if you could allow me to, raise a very important point about this land belongs to the citizens. I think it's just sent me thinking, and I'll need to think about this deeper, but I need to declare almost immediately that in the event that actually that is the case, it reinforces my very strong opinion that Ugandan land should not be sold or given to non-citizens. And so therefore it raises a very important question to which the lawyer, whether or not the land that we give dubiously to some so-called investors, when you have landless Ugandans, including Ugandans who wish actually be able to invest, to inject some energy in Uganda's economy, in the agricultural sector, do not have the opportunity not only to borrow money, but perhaps to access some of this land. So I think it's very important. But in the event that actually it is as clear as that, then maybe there are some major constitutional breaches that have been made, and these are legal issues that for somebody like me, I'll be seeking to move forward. But that's it really. If part of your question was, where do we go now? If I can, I think I lost it. Where do we go now? I think to me, quite clearly, which was talking about his figures, economist fees. You don't need to be an economist to know and to read the headlines that most of the monies that were given out for COVID have not gone to the appropriate intended destinations. You don't have to be an economist to read the headlines, including what's happening with the ministers, including of health and researchers. You don't have to be an economist actually to know, as I said, some of the things that our colleague Enoq is helping us with on the economic figures. You don't have to be an economist to actually explain some of the very major issues that, to which is credit, talks about, which is this not only skills and education, but the inequality crisis that this country faces, that more than half the country has got a population, more than 2 generations perhaps, that have either not gone to school or missing out on education. I wrote in my column just about the other month that NRM regime should stop the educational appetite, because just in my Miena Gongera, the school I went to, there was no Division 1. Nobody got Division 1. And yet for me, I walked barefoot to Nagongera, and I was amongst the top pupils in the country. And so these are some of the issues. But these are actually not economics issues. These are political questions. The political questions of leadership. And Mr. Museveni, after all this other time, considering actually the mess that he actually subjected our people in Luweero, there's no reason why he should not actually have some humility and come back and say, well, you guys have got it wrong. We need to redraw the priority map and to do, including what Awich today have just thought about, that there may be a possibility. I called for this, Jane. I called for focusing on Luweero, as part of rehabilitation, including making sure that people of Luweero got special attention. These guys gave them a minister for Luweero, but I'm told Luweero is now still as poor as in a part of Uganda, because as I understand it, I'm here to visit. I don't know which skyscrapers are there, as a result of a minister for Luweero. Maybe there's a possibility, that going forward, we might actually have some kind of mini affirmative action, particularly on the girl child from the north and east that you're talking about, or perhaps some of these educational institutions, to try and create a sense of rebalance on these things going forward. And it's something that, as a matter of policy, I would want to consider. But beyond that, I think, how do we go beyond here? Yes, this Uganda's economy will get out of this mess, thankfully, because we are the Pearl of Africa. We've got reasonable land, and reasonable rain, and it's not a privilege of NRM from Chad on the road. This is a gift from God. We just need to be able to coordinate them properly. So those are possibilities that mean that as long as people are not going hungry, as a group, which there's a possibility that we'll get out of it. But really, the economic question, is a political one now. Because of the political deficit that Jane sort of very diplomatically referred to, these are usually, ideally, must be manifesto questions where in a political debate, political parties would even already now, and actually see this for the first time, I'm going to criticize the other side so that it gets excited. Really right now, we should be having a conversation, national conversation, in which leaders of the various opposition political parties say, this is the state of our economy, this is the mess these NRA laws have done, but in the likely event that, and this is what they should have done, but in the likely event that we're in position, this is what we would do. Maybe that would actually help Awich. Except, of course, the NRA guys will not listen. But at least you put that on the table.
Exactly.
There is something important. Awich is desperately saying that this country needs a national dialogue. The national dialogue that would bring in many of these other things, and I think Jane, of course, really coming from Jane and Awich agrees, is this, that it cannot happen, unfortunately, without a commitment from the various political leaders. Museveni does not have the will for national political dialogue. I know that one or two individuals as leaders in the opposition may not necessarily be very keen. I strongly suggest that this country needs a national consensus that will determine a sense of hope and possibilities, a dissection of issues on the table, for which then the economists can then begin to pick what are really the best remedies that we can then go ahead and apply to inject either remodeling of our economies or perhaps a prioritization of key sectors. How we leave agriculture today, and we have 100,000 shillings, and we know what is going on in rural Uganda, including in the back of my Mwiri in Busoga. I have no clue. It is political leadership, it's a political will. These are policy-driven issues. The economics, yes, but the policy issues, but the political policy issues. And that is what differentiates between a regime that has come in to keep itself in power and political parties and organizations with sets of values that believe in the people, in this case, including EPC, to simply say, we will direct it in this way. That needs a national conversation.
I think when you talk about national conversation, of course, maybe including Ndugu Awich would agree if you come in that position. But I think the national conversations that the other parties and the other players try to front is regime change. Of course, then the witnesses would say, no. But if it is on issues, of course, of policy and what, I think the witches would really welcome that.
I think that's a very important point, actually. That's a very important point. And if I may say so, it is absolutely fair and open that people can have a collision of interests for regime change. That is politics, so long as they don't go contrary to they don't do it illegally. Unfortunately, of course, the Awich don't even allow a demonstration, which is in demonstration or picketing. But a conversation where political leaders actually show leadership, and I want to be part of that, in which we genuinely engage across the political divide, that is a conversation which must be held. My problem is I see certain people in so-called political position who are unwilling to be part of that, possibly because they don't have a clue, you'll be pleased, but also see Museveni, whose interest it is not really to engage on this because it's going to be exposed.
But you see, Joseph, you know, I don't think, because we also have, as citizens, we have expectations from our
leaders.
The leaders.
Yes.
And I don't think it would be right to say, if NRM doesn't join you, you don't have a position as opposition.
I totally agree.
You should meet as an opposition
Yes.
and give the country hope that this is what
Give direction,
we want. Give direction. And it will also help us as citizens to be able to see whether you also have any plans and alternatives. You know, so
Jane is really helping you listen to her. Yes.
So for me, what I think, you don't need to say, you know, in them they can't come. But for you, what are your alternative plans? You know, issues of prioritization, you are saying, issues of the sectors. What are your plans? We don't see them.
I was being very diplomatic. I was trying to save my other colleagues.
That is discussing iPod.
Now,
I totally agree.
I don't know which forum you'd want this discussion to take. Let's start for the starter to the fact that we have the 5-year mandate. Well, if you think that we should set this aside and do this, I don't know.
That's exactly the point.
Please, when you talked, I didn't interrupt. Now, one obvious forum is the iPod. It's the NRM who are strongly agitating for an iPod. That is the only available forum now where we can discuss. Unfortunately, NUP is not coming in, but they have signed the money for it. And because the law provides that the parties, that money which is provided through election commission is shared in percentage form according to the parties who have gone to your representation in parliament. So we thought that NUP would get this money because of their percentage representation in parliament and also go a long way to participate. So I want to allude to allay your fears that NRM is not opposed to a discussion. The question is a forum. Which body does that? So far, that is a legitimate body.
Yes.
If you go to seeking for another body, another forum, that's what it's saying. You want us to negotiate regime change. Because that would be the other forum that you want.
Actually, there's a forum.
If that is what you are now saying, that disregard the 5 years, that
No.
So which other forum are you discussing?
There's a third option.
Which other forum?
There's a third option.
They're actually saying that with your manifesto, you can have a discussion around the manifesto in a national platform.
Exactly.
Yes. And number two,
But interesting, would these other players, would these other political players be willing to if they really fronted that?
But I alluded to that. You said we should do the thinking. I said this is an issue that should be discussed. You refused, and you said you pay us money for that. We should do the
But for us, what do I do? For us as citizens, you know, when I hear this bickering, you know, for us as citizens, we get disappointed. For us, what we are saying, there is an issue to discuss. Whether you use iPod or whatever, the economy is in distress. We are coming out of want to recover from COVID. Political parties, what are you saying? If you have a mandate, is it the right mandate? And this is what we expect from opposition political parties to provide
and let me set to your mind that if it were a UPC government, this is what I would do, away from all these others. And this is what we try to teaching Museveni and helping him for nothing, really, advising him, that as president, as leader of the country, you basically come out, you give the mood and the mode and the context, you know? You go for, the other day they was going for these trips where the South African president travels with the leader of opposition, the Botswana president travels with the leader of opposition, and then the NUP leader is denied exit. This is what kind of is the spirit of these things. So if it was a UPC president, the UPC government, this is what I would do. I would simply say, fellow citizens, here's where we are. Comrade Chagulanyi, where are you? Comrade Kagota, where are you in Chagulanyi? And then you come and yes, you see, let's talk. You see the kind of thing that Uhuru does. This is what I'm trying to say. And you're right. It's neither iPod, no, it doesn't have.
But I want it to be on record. I want it to be on record that here I am the first person who alluded
to
an issue of discussion.
Yes.
But now you turn around to make it look like I'm the one against it.
Let's get back to the issue.
I put it, you said, no, we pay you salary. Now you turn around and make it look like it is us.
It's your boss, by the way. It's your boss, not you.
It is an area for further discussion. But I need to bring in Enoq. Enoq, you've been silent. But of course, we talked about the issues we wanted to discuss the implications, first of all, on the rising commodity prices, because yes, it is Jen who first talked about the inflation and increase, but now we're seeing fuel increment. You also talked about it. What would be the implication of the increase in prices to the economy?
I think, of course, first maybe let me just comment on this. I think one of the things, whichever party is in place, I think you need a functioning government, because government is the biggest client to the economy. And at the same time, you cannot have a thriving private sector when you have a dysfunctional or half-baked government. So some of the inefficiencies within government tend to also rub onto the private sector.
Over,
So, and I can give you an example. If government has, suppliers have given government things and you're not paying up, the defaults that accrue in the banking industry, that's how the cycle manifests. So government doesn't pay, the clients are not, the suppliers are not paying the banks. So then there's a whole chain of
rat race.
So I think the issue is whoever is in government, you must organize. And part of public sector reform or any reform, it starts with institutions, individuals, then the infrastructure. Once you don't sort the institutions and individuals, you can't put the economic infrastructure that you need to drive the necessary reforms that you need. So for me, that's the comment on, and I think the debate should be now on whether we have an effective governance system. If we do not have, how can we, within the next 5 years, given that we've given them a mandate, how can we foster this? On the issue of inflation, like I had said, our inflation is not necessarily arising out of the demand side. It's actually arising out of, I was recently in Nairobi and I traveled to Tanzania, and because I work in Rwanda, I was able to compare prices. You'll be surprised that they've gone across the board. They've gone high
throughout
because of the global changes in oil prices. So that effect, and in some economies, take an example of Rwanda, they have controlled and regulated prices, but they have prices that are higher than Uganda. Now, one of the things that here we have a mode of competition that to some extent allows prices to remain relatively stable. In the extreme, I think that's when you need regulation of prices here. But if you compare with Rwanda now, and for many times I've always compared Rwandan prices and here. Of course, it could be distance from the coast that has an effect on.
How much is a bottle of Coca-Cola?
In Rwanda?
If you convert to dollars, compared to a small Coca-Cola.
No, in Rwanda, actually, Coca-Cola is more expensive. So if you use the purchasing power of a Coca-Cola
and Coca-Cola here, Coca-Cola is not good.
It's much more expensive. But
exactly.
if you use
which example? I just wanted a uniform thing.
If
you wanted something uniform.
If you use, for example, if you use Coca-Cola, it's more expensive in Rwanda than it is here.
But it would depend
if you use
on the taxes, maybe.
If you
and
use
electricity, for example.
Yeah. But if you use beer, for example, it's cheaper in Rwanda than it is here. So it depends on the commodity, but the purchasing power parity, things are cheaper, relatively cheaper in Uganda than they are in Rwanda. So, but the effect, I think what you're asking is the effect. And I tried to do, at some point I tried to do maths on fuel. A barrel has about 150 liters crude oil. If you get the price of crude oil, which is about 85, and you convert it into Ugandan shillings, it translates into about 1,850. That's just the price of crude. But remember, we incur on petrol a tax of about 1,200. So if you add that, it's already coming to 3,000 before you add refining, transportation, and other intermediation costs locally. So meaning that the supplier who's here and who has to, for them to actually make money, they have to churn out big volumes of and that's why you see some of the, if you actually and look at the market of, you've seen exits, you've seen struggles, even when you go within the, the tax, you tend to see struggles with some of the petrol stations. So I think the issue is not that the petrol stations are overly marking up. I think because of also the it's competitive in an oligopolistic structure, few enough suppliers.
But Enoq, I would want to understand what explains the cost of fuel in Ntinda being different from one in Banda
Lack of regulation.
and possibly in
Market
Ruaga.
Now
Let's say we are in Kampala.
what could happen, of course, is that if you go to South Africa, the price and Rwanda,
Tanzania.
those that regulate.
But this is one chain, which is Shell.
Yes.
And
Yes,
you see,
the reason is that Total supplies fuel to all different, what they will do is to regulate the standards, but they are not controlling the price. You get it? So if my price you'll notice like in Ntinda, they're about the same because of the rent. Rent is also different.
And then some of them are franchises anyway. So.
Yes, so those are some of, I think, intermediation costs for running those businesses, what would give the variation in prices. So that's what I would think would
Except
explain.
if you don't mind, what about
Then you hear that?
the
No
imbalance?
regulation.
The imbalances
Yeah,
on taxation that per barrel, how much does Tanzania charge in terms of taxation compared to Kenya, Rwanda? And how would these governments do that in order to cushion the price rises at the pump?
I think some of what you're actually saying is what is happening, because you've seen like actually Kenyans had been crossing the Malaba border to get fuel from Uganda and then drive back, those neighboring ones, because fuel was cheaper in Uganda. What the government has
In
done
price terms, yes.
in the short term is to provide a relief, to say, okay, the fuel companies give us what the estimated additional cost is if you're to keep the prices at what they are.
And that's me, yeah.
And then government would would have that fiscal burden.
Precisely, yeah.
So that then it protects, because fuel is an input into production.
Indeed.
And the end user is the one who eventually, now that's how
the burden.
inflation tends to fit
Yes.
into, and like I said, 20% of our imports are actually petroleum products. So when they increase, then it means that most of these will also feed into, and also with the electricity tariffs, we always adjust our tariff rate based on the fuel prices. So
I wanted you to say more on that.
It tends to feed into, and I think what we are likely to see with the central bank, if the secondary round effects of the fuel prices are likely to be significant, then we'll see the central bank to start increasing its central bank rate.
Oh, interesting.
So that's what
Which
we're
will
likely
be,
to see. Because now in I think the next week we'll be seeing the monetary policy statement by the governor on what the outlook is, looking at the transmission of fuel prices and other prices. Because also we're likely to have this season of the rains, they've come late and they've also been short. So we're likely to see, and they've also come heavy, destroying products. So we're likely to also see a likely food shortage, which then also tends to feed into inflation. So those are some of the issues that I think will guide the inflation discussion.
Interesting. Yeah, and of course, then that fits into what I would want to ask Jen. What would be the government's control on inflation, especially now that we're even getting into the festivities, and this always comes with increase in prices. Of course, demand is there. What would you think should the government put up as controls on
But government
inflation?
doesn't have any controls, and this is what we are saying. It's about market forces, and that's why we are talking about different prices in Ntinda, different prices there. It's the whole issue of liberalization, market forces of demand and supply.
Yes.
And this is what I'm saying, I'm requesting that the leaders, our leaders, especially the opposition, should be able to come and pronounce themselves on alternatives. If this is what's happening, what kind of economic policy interventions are they proposing on table? What kind of economic models are they putting on table to be able to control what's happening? Because today it's fuel. The other time it was hospitals, private hospitals. The other time it was transport. And we see all these things happening. They hurt the economy, they hurt the people. So we have to look at it broadly. And maybe I can see you looking at your watch.
Yes.
I was just proposing that if it's possible, you talked about recovery. Recovery plans. Government has already come out with a budget strategy for 2022-2023. For me, I think it's really because that's the blueprint of what government wants to do in 2022-2023. And I think it's important really
Or
to
21-22.
2022-2023. The budget
The
strategy.
next cycle.
Yeah, next
So
cycle.
it's the budget strategy. So now we are preparing the budget
the budget
for
strategy.
For this.
2022-23.
23. And that's the
So the
budget
budget
strategy.
budget circular now, the budget strategy.
It's already out
for
by
the
Ministry
next
of
cycle.
Finance for the next cycle. And for me, I think if we can be able to engage on that concretely, because, budgets are important because we talk with our pockets. When somebody says, I love you, and you wait and see the hands don't go into the pocket.
I have no comment yet.
So
I thought
the
it's from
budget.
Mutima.
How do I see? How do I see?
The Mutima is in the pocket.
So this is my proposal that this space we should discuss that budget strategy.
Yes.
And for me, I
This is
think
a
that's
discussion we should have
really
next
concrete,
year,
whether
at some
it will
point.
deliver on all these aspirations we're talking about.
Interesting. Now, I think our
But
time
also
is fast
maybe
spent.
what also needs to happen is what he was alluding to, the current budget and the realism and the challenges, because we've already seen challenges, and I've seen the PSST allude to it, saying 40% of the budget has been cut. What are the implications of this?
Okay, so we can review where we are and also look at the proposals for 2022-2023.
I think, Jen, we shall have a discussion on how we can bring this into a conversation.
that
Maybe
would
if the experts are allowed to come back,
Indeed.
so that we can really have a conversation around that budget. So I think we need to get into a conclusion because our time is fast spent. I need to, Joseph, let me start with you. I think I'll give again the opportunity to Pollar to give our final remarks. So let us give a general way forward for the growth and, of course, stability of our economy.
Pollar is very lucky that's going to have the last word. But so that's absolutely fine. We'll give it to him. But no, I think actually, as a matter of interest, our two guests, because we are slightly much more regular here, we actually did discuss this budget stuff. But it's very interesting, including the challenges Jane has put to us, that perhaps at some stage, this program, the citizens actually like to have an opportunity to critique exactly where we are and how well we are doing with this and going far, before actually looking at the next projection. And if anything, they've actually challenged the political parties and political leaders. I think really my own conclusion would be that it's a mess, but the conversation here has actually shown that there's insufficient discussion when it comes to matters of the economy. There are insufficient spaces for policy discussions and policy debates. Even the manifesto stuff that Awich normally likes to throw, NRS things, basically a propaganda document that they throw around, and then since the manifesto, electoral manifesto, genuinely the citizens need to have slightly much more deeper conversations. And I think the challenge to us, political leaders, political party leaders, political leaders broadly, really beyond political parties, to engage, not only as centers for alternatives, but to engage with governments as basically giving possibilities and hopes. Except that this government, sometimes the more you have a conversation about critiquing some of the loopholes, they actually see as opposition is almost like the enemy thing rather than the
Don't worry about
alternative.
that.
Of course, no, we've been long. UPS has been far long with these people.
Yes.
No, I think it is not too late for this government to think about the farmers, think about mitigation, perhaps bigger possibilities about price increases, as actually as alluded, which is very likely going to affect the farmers and very likely going to affect the low income. But just in a conclusive 30 seconds, as a matter of interest, Jane, UPC was actually founded way before independence, and some of our agitations, and that's the reason why we're a national political party, were founded around the issues of the agitations for the day-to-day African farmer in terms of fair prices, fair wages, and how much they're able to then go ahead
Why
and
don't you
purchase
bring
using
back, tell people about the Common Man's Charter?
the Common Man's Charter is coming on programs by the document of review, but for the moment, it's about we're trying to sort out our internal house.
Thank you very much,
Okay.
Joseph.
Yeah,
I need to
that's
give 2 seconds to the experts that are here before we get to Pollar on the way forward for our stability as a country. Enoch, then Jen.
I think for me, with the economy rests on the effectiveness of fiscal policy. The central bank, what the central bank can do, it's always the first line of defense. So they're just more or less cleaning up. But to address the economy, it's about what we, and the issues of around fiscal policy start from what we would call fiscal prudency. How much you spend and how you finance your expenditure. And the discussion I think we're having, and which we can have at a later stage, is the mode of financing our fiscal deficit or financing, the entire fiscal strategy. That's one. The second, underneath that, is what is your allocative efficiency? Who are you allocating the money? And lastly, once you've done the allocation of the money, how is the operational efficiency of that budget? I think for me, once you have, now we've already done allocations, but we need, I think, by and large, and I've seen even the president of Kenya talk about it, the moment you do not have public sector efficiency, and leave alone even spending money, we should not have the public sector be a red tape. If you're going to search for your land, it should be instant. Then integration, what we've seen, and what we've seen in many other places, is improving the e-governance. So improving e-governance, meaning that services are now going digital. And citizens can actually access them. Government is also accounting using the same e-government platform. So for me, I think fiscal prudence is very important, but also the e-governance is very critical in taking it forward.
Yeah, thank you very much, Enoch, for those last words. And Jen now?
Thank you so much. For me, I believe that the economy rests on the ideology, what the state believes in. If the state believes that development is for the people and by the people, then you put the people, the citizens, at the center of the policy making, not the corporations. Today, when you look at all these policies, be them investment policies, trade policies, financial policies, it's about others, not the people. So I believe that when we are talking about the reforms, because we need to undertake economic reforms, so many economic reforms, even in agriculture, in the value chains, you need to be aware that there are inequalities there between the rural areas, the urban areas, between the men and the women. So any rethinking and planning has to take that into consideration. But that means that the people that it's the people. We are not looking at figures. GDP has gone up, economic growth has gone up, you know, yet inequality is going up. And lastly, I think it's important because there is a global rethink, by the way. Today, these last 2 days, there is a UN conference on business and human rights. Very, very, you know, very intense,
yes.
you know. But what's coming out globally, you know, is that government has a responsibility to regulate in the public interest. Because we are citizens, we pay our taxes to government, we put government in power, you know, so it has the responsibility to regulate the private sector, and this is what we are talking about, fuel, to regulate the private sector in the public interest, but also to ensure that it promotes the rights
Monitor our spends, yes.
of the citizens. For me, that's the basis of any economic reforms and policies.
Thank you very much. Finally, Awich.
Yeah, I like to pick from what Jen is saying about the centrality of government in the stability of the economy. And I still insist that we have the mandate and we're going
You
to
have it.
Jen question whether it is legitimate or not. It is legitimate.
I didn't say
Because
that.
Jane did not say
I
that.
didn't.
At one point. So because
My
I wanted
brother,
to say that if there was any challenge,
Jane alone, I might have done it, but not Jane.
I want to say
Not me.
I want to say
I
that
didn't.
if there was any challenge, it would have come as a petition to the Supreme Court, which was attempted but abandoned. So we have the legitimacy. But
We haven't questioned
what
that.
I want to
by
say
the way.
here is
No, we
that
haven't.
one thing is, many things are coming clear in our discussion is that the economy is there, but there are challenges, and we call on
Yeah.
all
Huge
actors,
challenges.
Sure.
all actors to come on board.
Sure.
Two is that we have also noted that actually at the moment we have cheaper things than our neighbors. To the effect that Kenyans come for fuel, we have, compared to Rwanda, the expert has said it. And then the other thing that has come out clear, in my opinion, is that there are some factors which are beyond Uganda, and it shouldn't be politicized, like the fuel prices. You don't politicize it, that it is NRM. So, the economy is a challenge. All actors should do what they can, but also these other clear factors have come up. But government is surely going to do what it is, and I think that is why, surely that's why you have seen the stability of the dollars and inflation, which has been stable. So no hope is lost. We are on the right track.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pollar, for that. And of course, also to thank you all our panelists, my panelists today, for honoring the invitation and also coming here to share the expertise on the issues, economics, and what is everything that is affecting us as a country. Of course, to our viewers out there, thank you very much for being ardent followers of this show every Friday to 4 p.m. And of course, we'll need to meet next week. But for now, finally, of course, I need to ask you to just get on that YouTube channel, click, subscribe, and be part of these conversations every time. Post your thoughts, your comments, so that you can pick them and share out with the rest of us who would want to follow. Of course, on our Twitter hashtag, the chat show UG, the conversation is running. We're discussing this. Be part of this conversation. And of course, for the good of our country, may God bless Uganda.